The fire crackled softly, painting the walls of the old cottage in strokes of gold and shadow. Every pop and hiss sounded like the whisper of time itself, steady, patient, eternal. I sat in my worn rocking chair, the one that creaked like old bones, while my granddaughter Lila perched cross-legged on the faded rug before me. Her hair, a dark tumble of curls, caught the light in places where the fire danced. "Tell me a story, Grandpa," she said, hugging her knees, her voice brimming with that innocent excitement I once believed the world couldn't take from anyone. I smiled, the kind of smile that hides more than it shows. "Another one? You never tire of an old man's rambling." She giggled. "Your stories are the best. Mama says they're old-fashioned." "Ah," I murmured, chuckling softly. "Old-fashioned things have a way of lasting longer than they should." I stared into the fire for a long moment before speaking again, letting my voice settle into that gentle rhythm children trust. "Once upon a time, there was a farmer who lived at the edge of a great field. He worked hard, loved his family, and believed that kindness always returned to those who gave it." Lila's eyes brightened. "Did it?" I paused. "No," I said simply. "Not for him." One day, a man came, a merchant who smiled wide and spoke softly, but his heart was colder than winter. The merchant took the farmer's land, his savings, and left him with nothing but the ghosts of what he'd lost. Lila frowned. "That's not fair." "No," I said, watching the flame dance in her eyes. "It wasn't." The room fell quiet except for the crackle of the hearth. Outside, the wind brushed against the windows like an old friend who'd long forgotten how to knock. I sipped my tea, lukewarm now, and let the bitterness settle on my tongue. On the mantel, a photograph watched me. A younger version of myself stood beside my wife and our son. The boy was smiling, full of light, unburdened by the world. My wife's hand rested gently on my shoulder. Next to that photo, almost mocking me, was another, Arthur Bellamy, his arm around me, our smiles bright with youth and promise. Arthur, the man who'd been both partner and predator, the man who took everything. I turned my gaze back to Lila, my heart aching with something that was part love, part sorrow. "Do you know what the farmer did next?" I asked softly. She shook her head, curls bouncing. "He waited," I said. "He waited for the soil to remember. Because you see, the land never forgets who wronged it. It only takes time to decide what to grow next." She giggled again, not understanding. "You make everything sound like a mystery, Grandpa." I smiled, though my eyes stayed fixed on the flames. "That's because life is a mystery, my dear, especially when it burns slow." As she nestled into her blanket and the fire dimmed to embers, I whispered the last words more to myself than to her. And sometimes, bedtime stories aren't just for children. Morning came slow, dragging a pale light across the cottage floorboards. The house woke with me. The groan of old timber, the faint tick of the mantel clock, the kettle sighing like it, too, carried secrets too heavy to hold. I moved through the motions of the day, as I always had. Coffee first, strong and black, poured into the chipped mug my wife once favored. Its handle was cracked, a thin line like a scar. I kept it because of that, because scars like memories mean survival. Outside, the fog clung to the trees, swallowing the fence line in white silence. From the kitchen window, I could see Lila in her red coat, chasing the neighbor's cat with that careless joy only children are granted. I envied her that the clean, untarnished innocence of not knowing what people are capable of. On the desk in my study sat a stack of papers I hadn't touched in years. Letters, ledgers, old contracts with Arthur Bellamy's signature looping across them like a curse. The ink had faded, but the betrayal had not. Arthur and I had once been brothers in all but blood. We built a company together, or so I thought. While I worked, he schemed. While I trusted, he forged. When the scandal broke, it was my name on the documents that destroyed everything. He vanished with the money, the reputation, and the sympathy of others. I was left with whispers, ruined credit, and a wife who cried herself into silence. Then, a few winters later, my boy, my only son, ended his pain the only way he knew how. I remember the way the snow fell that morning, soft as ash, and thinking that perhaps it was mercy that he would never live to grow bitter. 50 years I have carried that silence. 50 years I told myself that letting go was wisdom, that time would bring balance. But time brings nothing but rust. It erodes the edges of anger until you mistake it for peace, until you realize it was simply waiting, patient as death. It was last December when the paper brought me Arthur's name again, this time in the obituaries. His wife, Margaret, gone after a long illness. I stared at the black print for a long time, tracing the words with trembling fingers. Something inside me stirred. Not joy, not sorrow, but awakening. Grief breaks men open, and in his grief, I saw the first crack in the armor of his long, charmed life. That's when I began writing again. Not for myself, not for confession, but for him. Letters, simple and unsigned. A line here, a phrase there, reminders of things he had buried deep. Do you remember the winter of '72? You left something behind. The land never forgets. He would know my handwriting if he looked close. But I doubted he could bear to. I took a slow sip of my coffee, bitter as the memories it stirred. Outside, Lila called my name, her laughter breaking the stillness. I smiled faintly, the way I always do when light finds its way through cracks. She didn't need to know what I was doing. Not yet. That evening, the rain tapped against the window pane like soft fingers, steady and unrelenting. The air smelled of wet earth and pine smoke. Lila sat bundled in her blanket, her head resting on my knee as the fire painted her cheeks with its glow. Another story, Grandpa, she murmured, eyes half closed, about the farmer? I smiled, slow, gentle, but heavy. Ah, yes, the farmer. I stirred the coals with the iron poker, watching sparks leap and die. Well, my dear, after the merchant took everything from him, the farmer left his land. For many years, he lived quietly. He worked other people's fields, tended their animals, smiled when they called him a good man. But every night, when he lay down to rest, he could still feel the soil calling his name. Lila yawned. Did he miss his farm? Oh, more than anything. But what he missed most, I said, my voice softening, was justice. She looked up at me then, her brow furrowed. Didn't anyone help him? No, child, I said. People rarely help the wronged when the wrongdoer smiles the sweetest. The firelight caught the fine lines of my hands as I reached for my tea. I could almost feel Arthur's smirk again, that polished charm that had fooled everyone but me. Too late. The farmer, I continued, decided that if the world would not make things right, he would. So he began planting again. Not in fields, no. He planted seeds of remembrance. Lila giggled. That sounds like magic. In a way, I said, nodding, it was. He sent the merchant letters, small and harmless at first. Notes about old times, forgotten debts, names of people long dead, words that only the merchant could understand. She blinked, confused. But why? Because sometimes, I whispered, leaning closer, the mind is a crueler field than any soil. Once you plant out there, it grows wild. Her gaze lingered on me, unsure whether to be frightened or fascinated. I smiled to ease her worry, running a hand through her hair. You see, my dear, when someone hurts you, time doesn't erase it. It just buries it deeper. But the roots keep spreading underground. Her eyes softened again. So, did the farmer ever forgive the merchant? Forgive, I repeated, tasting the word like something foreign. No, forgiveness is a luxury for those who can forget. The farmer remembered. I let the silence stretch, the fire dimming to embers. In truth, I mailed my last letter to Arthur just days ago. Inside the envelope, I'd placed a cassette tape, a relic from the past. My wife's voice lived on it, reading bedtime stories to our son. The very same tape Arthur once helped me record. I imagined him hearing her voice again after all these years. The warmth, the laughter, the echo of a life he'd stolen. I wondered if he'd recognize the story she read that night. The greedy merchant and the honest farmer. Lila's breathing slowed as she drifted to sleep, her small hand resting on mine. I looked into the dying fire and whispered, "Sleep well, little one. The story's almost over." It happened on a morning so ordinary it almost felt cruel. The sky was the color of pewter, low clouds pressing down on the hills beyond my cottage. The air smelled of damp leaves and smoke, the scent of endings. I was slicing bread for breakfast when the mail arrived. The postman waved from the gate, and I waved back, the way old men do when they've run out of friends but still pretend they haven't. Among the bills and catalogs lay one envelope, plain, yellowed, with my own handwriting staring back at me. My heart gave a strange flutter. I'd written that letter half a century ago, the plea I'd sent to Arthur Bellamy when the world turned against me, asking him to tell the truth, to save what was left of my name. He never answered it. Until now. I turn it over. On the back, in a shaky, desperate scrawl, were 5 words. "You win. I can't do this anymore." The room tilted. I sank into my chair, the letter trembling in my hands. For a long while, I just listened to the clock ticking on the mantel, each tick a heartbeat, each talk an echo of the past. When the news came later that afternoon, I didn't have to hear the name. The neighbor's radio muttered through the static. Local businessman Arthur Bellamy, found dead in his study. Authorities suspect heart failure. Heart failure. How poetic. I poured myself a drink that night, the first in years. The whiskey burned like memory. Sharp, honest, unrelenting. The fire crackled low in the hearth. The flames tired but still alive. Lila played on the floor, humming softly to herself. She was stringing together beads, building little patterns of color, unaware that her grandfather had just ended a story that began before her mother was born. "Grandpa," she said, "can you tell me how the farmer story ends?" I stared into the fire, the weight of the years pressing on my chest. "Ah, yes," I said slowly, "the farmer. Well, my dear, he finally harvested what he had planted." She smiled. "Did he get his farm back?" "No," I said softly. "What he grew wasn't what he expected. When he gathered his crops, he found they were bitter, poisoned by the soil he'd tended with hate." Lila frowned. "So he was sad?" I nodded, setting the glass down with trembling fingers. "Yes, very sad, because revenge, you see, is a crop that never feeds the soul. It only fills the belly for a moment, then leaves you emptier than before." She thought about that, her small fingers playing with the beads. "But he did make the merchant stop, right?" I hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Yes, he did." Outside, the wind whispered through the trees. The fire dimmed, and I felt the exhaustion of years settle into my bones. As Lila leaned against me, eyes heavy with sleep, I murmured the final line of our story. The farmer finally rested. But the land, my dear, the land remembered everything. The cottage felt smaller after the funeral. Dust motes floated lazily through the afternoon light, and the air carried the faint scent of old paper and smoke, the smell of my grandfather's life. I was 16 when he passed. He went quietly, they said, in his sleep. Peaceful. The word felt wrong somehow. Even as I sat in his study, surrounded by his books and his rocking chair, there was a hum beneath the silence, as though the house still remembered him and everything he never said aloud. Mama didn't want me poking around in his things, but curiosity is its own inheritance. I started with his desk. Beneath the loose floorboard where he used to hide old coins and sweets, I found a tin box wrapped in a handkerchief. Inside were letters, newspaper clippings, and a small leather journal. At first, I smiled. His handwriting was the same looping scrawl I'd seen on birthday cards and story notes. But as I began to read, the smile faded. The stories, our stories, were all there written in fragments. The farmer and the merchant, the land that remembered, the gift that brought back old ghosts. Only now I saw them for what they really were, memories, not fables. There were dates, addresses, even names. Arthur Bellamy, his company, his wife's obituary, letters with no return address. Written in that same careful hand I'd once watched trace circles on my palm when I was a child. Then I found a clipping. Arthur Bellamy found dead in his home, folded neatly between pages of his journal. On the margin beside it, my grandfather had written one final line. The harvest is done. My hands trembled as I turned to the back of the journal. A cassette tape sat in an envelope taped to the inside cover. On it, my grandmother's handwriting, bedtime stories for Daniel. That name, my uncle, the one who died before I was born. I sat there for hours, piecing it all together, the firelight of memory flickering to life with every page. The bedtime stories he told me, they weren't meant to lull me to sleep. They were confessions, warnings, lessons wrapped in the soft cadence of love. At the very end of the journal, written in ink so faded it was almost gone, I found his final words to me. Lila, my dear, I wanted you to know the truth, not so you would follow it, but so you would flee from it. Monsters aren't born in the dark. They grow in daylight, watered by grief and silence. I told you my story so you would never write one like it. I don't remember when I started crying. The sound of my own sobs seemed to fill the small room, mixing with the whisper of the wind through the chimney. When I left the study, I didn't take the journal or the letters. I only took the old cassette, my grandmother's voice, his ghosts, their love, and the knowledge that even the gentlest hearts can harden when left too long in the cold. That night, as the rain began to fall and thunder rolled over the hills, I heard his voice in my dreams, soft, familiar, and haunting. And sometimes, my dear, he whispered, the scariest bedtime stories are the ones that are true. And for the first time, I realized what he had been telling me all along. He told her his story as if it were a fairy tale, but by the time she understood, it was too late. Some bedtime stories never end. They live on in those who hear them.